On a Sunday afternoon in early June 1978, a group of motorcyclists were riding through the Plumas National Forest in Northern California. They came across a Forest Service trailer sitting alone at the end of a gravel road. The door had a broken window and there was smell. Ultimately, they went inside. On a bed, there was a body wrapped in 8 white sheets from head to toe. A man. He was impossibly thin skeleton. His beard had grown long and wild. His feet were black with frostbite. Now, someone had carefully placed his wallet, his nickel ring engraved with the name Ted, and a gold watch which didn't belong to him or anyone he knew. But here's what makes this case unlike anything you've ever heard. The trailer was stocked with ample amount of foods to keep 5 men alive for a whole year. There was even a propane tank that could have heated the entire place at the turn of a valve. But the strange part, none of it had been touched, and the man who had died, it starved to death. This is Beyond the Case, and once you hear the full story, you will never see it the same way again. Before we continue, subscribe. But to understand how Ted Weir, the man on the bed, ended up in the trailer, we need to go back 4 months to a Friday night in February, to a basketball game and a group of friends who everyone called the Boys. In 1978, in the small California towns of Yuba City and Marysville, there were 5 men who were practically inseparable. Ted Weir 32, Jack Madruga 30, Bill Sterling 29, Gary Mathias 24, and Jackie Hewitt 24. Now, all of these 5 men had some kind of intellectual disability or psychiatric condition. Ted and Jackie would fall somewhere in the autism spectrum by today's standards. Bill was deeply religious and spent most of his time reading books at the library. Jack Madruga was considered a slow learner, but he had a driver's license, was an army veteran, and took immaculate care of his turquoise and white 1969 Mercury Montego. Gary Mathias was different from the others. He had served in the army in the West Germany, where he developed a drug problem which got him a schizophrenia diagnosis and a psychiatric discharge. He'd been taking medication for several years to go on, and his doctors used to call him one of our sterling success cases. These 5 guys lived at home with their parents. They bonded through a local program called Gateway Projects, which served adults with disabilities. And the thing that brought them together, unlike anything else, basketball. They played on a team called Gateway Gators, and they were good enough that they qualified for the Sacramento Valley Special Olympics tournament, scheduled for Saturday to February 25th, 1978. Now, the winning team was supposed to win a week-long trip to Los Angeles. The boys were beside themselves with excitement. Gary asked his mother to wash his high-top sneakers. Bill asked his mother twice not to let him oversleep. They all laid out their Gateway Gators uniforms on their beds before the night of the tournament. But before the tournament, the boys had one last thing to do. The favorite college team, the UC Davis Aggies, was playing the Chico Wildcats. It was last game of the season on Friday 24th. So they all decided to hop into Jack Madruga's Mercury Montego and drove to Chico to watch the game. UC Davis won. They all were thrilled. The game ended around 10 p.m. They stopped at Bears Market right before closing. They picked up lemon pie, cherry pie, 2 Pepsis, and a half of mint. The road trip snacks for the drive home. The clerk watched them leave, heading in the direction of the Yuba City. That was the last time anyone saw 5 of them alive. And then the things took a very dark turn. Saturday morning, February 25th, the boys were supposed to meet at the Montgomery department store at 8 a.m., where a bus would take them to the tournament. But they never showed up. Now, you have to understand, these men were of unwavering routine. They had strict routine. They didn't stay out late, then go on spontaneous adventures. They were basically counting days down to the tournament. There was no way in the world that they would have voluntarily missed it. The following days, their mother started to get worried. Then they started to call the police. Then for 3 days, the authorities searched the highways between Yuba City and Marysville. Found nothing. Then after 3 days, a ranger from the Plumas National Forest called it, and as he had spotted the Mercury Montago of Jack Madruga on a mountain road. The police went to the location and what they found made absolutely no sense. The Mercury Montago was sitting alone in a dirt road at about 4,400 feet of elevation, right at the snow line. But this was about 70 miles of Chico. But here's the thing, Yuba City is supposed to be 50 miles south of Chico, and this car was 50 miles east, deep in the Sierra Nevada mountains. Now, the boys had driven in a completely wrong direction up a rugged mountain which none of their families said they had any reason to visit. None of them had ever been there before. The car was not damaged. Neither the underside showed any scraping, which was odd for such a rugged road. Investigators also noted that whoever drove this car either used extreme precision and care or knew the road well. Now, there was a quarter tank of gas left in the car. The engine started instantly as the police hotwired it, and five men could have easily pushed it out of the snowdrift it was sitting in. But nobody had tried. The snack wrappers from the Bears market were scattered on the seats, programs from the basketball games, and a neatly folded map of California. One window was down. The keys were gone, and so were the bodies. But here's where it gets strange. A man named Joseph Scones came forward and told the police that he'd been on the same mountain at the night of February 24th. He'd driven up the mountain to see the snow conditions around a cabin he owned before a planned skater with his family. Now, around 5:30 p.m., his car got stuck in the snow. While trying to push it to get it out, he started having chest pains. He got back in his car and kept the engine running for warmth. Now, around 6 hours later, 11:30 p.m., he saw headlights pull up behind him. He saw people getting out of the car. He thought he saw a woman carrying a baby get out as well. He called out for help. The headlights went off. Everyone went silent. Later, he saw flashlights. He started to call out for help again. The flashlights went off too. Nobody came to help him. Now, by early morning, his car had run out of gas and his chest pains had eased enough for him to walk. He hiked 8 miles down the mountain, near a lodge where he saw the abandoned Mercury Montago, where he said he heard the voices. So if that was the boys on the road, why didn't they help a man screaming for help? Why did they turn their flashlights off, their headlights off? And who was the woman with the baby? But here's the thing about Scones. His story changed between tellings, details shifted. The woman and the baby appeared in one version and not another. He had a history of alcohol problems and dishonesty. The investigators couldn't confirm or deny any of it. So, the search continued. But a massive winter storm hit and buried the mountain under feet of snow. The search was suspended and the families of the boys were kept waiting. Months passed. Theories piled up. Carjacking, abduction, maybe some confrontation at the basketball game. The families offered rewards. Some turned to psychics. One family told the reporters, "We definitely feel something has happened, but we also feel they're alive." They weren't. On June 4th, 1978, the snow had finally melted. A group of motorcyclists were riding through the Plumas National Forest where they came across a Forest Service trailer at a remote campground. The door had a broken window and the smell hit them before they got inside. They found Ted Weher. He's lying on a bed wrapped in 8 sheets, clearly like someone had been taking care of him. The tall, husky man who'd weighed around 200 pounds had wasted to roughly 100. His beard was long. The pathologist would later estimate that he had survived around 8 to 13 weeks after the day of his disappearance. His feet were black with frostbite and his leather shoes were missing. On the nightstand beside him, someone had carefully arranged his personal artifacts. His nickel ring engraved with Ted, his gold necklace, his wallet still containing cash, and one item that didn't belong to him or any of the other boys, the gold watch. Now, no one has ever been able to identify whose watch that was. But here's the detail that haunts every investigator that's ever looked at this case. There was a propane heating system in the trailer. All someone had to do was turn on a valve and the entire space would have had heat. Nobody turned it on. There were firewood, there were matches, any of it could have been burned for warmth. None of it was touched. There even was heavy winter clothing hung in storage. Nobody put it on. Outside, in the storage shed, investigators found a supply of military sea rations. 36 cans had been opened and eaten. But right next to the cans, in the same shed, was a locker containing dehydrated fruits, fruit cocktails, and enough food to keep 5 men alive for a year. But none of it had been eaten. One of the cans had been opened with an army issue P-38 can opener, a small military tool that only someone with service experience would know how to use. Well, Gary Mathias had served in the army, so had Jack Madruga. There was one more detail. The investigators found Gary Mathias' tennis sneakers in the trailer. But there was no sign of him. He was not in the trailer, not outside, not anywhere. The day they found Ted, the police ran out the investigation between the car and the trailer. But what they found next told a grim story. 11 miles from the car leading towards the trailer, they found remains of Jack Madruga and Bill Sterling. Best friends in life, both died of hypothermia. Madruga was partially eaten by animals, his right hand curled around his watch. Sterling was scattered across 50 feet. Nothing left but bones. 2 days later, Jackie Hewitt's father found his son. 2 miles from the trailer, a backbone, a pair of jeans, some shoes, and the skull 100 yards away. 4 of the 5 boys were accounted for. Gary Mathias, the one with the schizophrenia diagnosis, was nowhere to be found. The investigators pieced together a theory that raised more questions than it answered. The day before the boys disappeared, February 23rd, a Forest Service snowcat drove up the mountain to clear out the snow from the rooftop of the trailer. The police believes that the boys may have followed in the tracks of the snowcat to find a shelter, which they did 19 miles later. But by then, Madruga's and Sterling's body has already given out in the cold and they collapsed. Weir and Mathias apparently made it to the trailer. They broke a window to get in. The sea ration can opened by P-38 suggests Mathias was the one feeding them. The sheets carefully wrapped around Ted's body suggest that he was being taken care for as he had frostbitten feet and he was slowly starving. And then at some point, Mathias left. Investigators believe he took Ted's leather shoes with him, which were larger and warmer than his own sneakers, and walked right out of the trailer. Maybe to find help. Maybe without his medication, he was not able to think clearly. 3 Forest Service blankets and the rusted flashlight was found quarter mile northwest of the trailer. They were already there or they belonged to the boys, no one knows. But none of it explains why were they there in the first place. The drive from Chico to Yuba City is a straight shot south of the Highway 70. Flat valley land, no snow, 1 hour. Why did 5 men who had the most important game of their lives the next morning, the men who had laid out their uniforms on their beds, washed their sneakers and set mental alarms not to oversleep, drive 70 miles in the wrong direction, up a mountain, into the remote wilderness where they'd never been? in the clothes meant for a mild February evening. One theory: Matthias had friends in the small town of Forbstown. Maybe they tried to make a quick stop. They maybe took a wrong turn, went up the mountain, thinking civilization was just ahead until the snow stopped them. But the boys' family rejected this. These were creatures of habit. The idea that any of them would agree to a midnight mountain detour the night before their dream tournament is almost impossible to accept. Jack Madruga's mother, Mabel, said it plainly. There was some force that made them go up there. They wouldn't have just fled off into the woods like a bunch of quail. There was someone who made them do it. And there's one question about the trailer that no one can answer. Ted Weir had food right next to him, but he didn't eat it. There was an entire heating system, nobody turned it on. The families believed that their kids' disabilities made them reluctant to use the things they didn't own. And that explanation is heartbreaking because Ted Weir may have starved to death out of following the rules. But Matthias was there too. He'd been in the army, he opened the sea ration cans, he knew how to survive. But why didn't he do more? Was someone else there? Was the honor of the gold watch there? Was someone else controlling of what they could and couldn't touch? In October 2020, an internal Yuba County Sheriff's memo stated that Gary Mathias was a victim of foul play, and the case still remains open as a missing persons case. That memo was never meant to be seen by the public. 47 years later, the Yuba County Five remains one of the most disturbing cases in the American history. Not because of what we know, but because everything we know makes it even worse. Five friends went to a basketball game. They bought apple pies, chocolate money. They were coming home on a Friday night with their uniforms laid out on bed, with the Los Angeles Strip on the line. And somehow, something made them turn around. Something sent them up that mountain road into the remote wilderness that swallowed four of them whole. The fifth, Gary Mathias, walked out of there in a dead man's shoes and vanished from the face of the earth. The Yuba County Undersheriff who worked the case in 1978 said only 6 words. Maybe those 6 words, even half a century later, are the only honest thing anyone's been able to say. This case is bizarre as hell. If you think cases like this deserves to be told honestly and carefully, please consider subscribing to Beyond the Case. It helps us keep these forgotten cases alive. And the next time you're driving on a dark road and think about taking a shortcut you have never taken before, maybe don't.